Have you ever lost your voice? I'm not talking about laryngitis here or the after effects of a particularly raucous karaoke night. I'm talking about that shrinking feeling when you lose all sense of who you are, your confidence, your way in the world. Well, I have, my friend. I think it's been a cocktail of a few things over the years. An exhausting, but not exhaustive combo of the shifting sands of identity, early motherhood, the ravaging of the beast that is perimenopause, social anxiety, masking, burnout, and let's not even mention the pandemic. I have become obsessed with this whole idea of finding your voice and what it means creatively, personally, and collectively when we find it. I want to understand how you find it, and if you've lost it, how do you get it back? Join me as I talk to fascinating people who have found their voices and aren't afraid to use them. People who have found their purpose, their passion, and fearless, authentic expression. I'm talking about writers, activists, artists, thinkers, entrepreneurs. We're going to get into their work and their life stories. How did they do it? What were the turning points? What barriers did they overcome? How did they find the courage? And what tips and tricks do they have to navigate this business of becoming? I'm looking to reclaim my voice, yes, and to get my mojo back, but it's more than that. I want to understand this topic and look at it from all angles: historical, cultural, societal, biological, mythical, even mystical. And most of all, through a female lens. Let's not beat about the bush, it's mostly women I'll be speaking to, with the occasional brilliant man thrown in. But these conversations are for anyone who resonates with the quest. Everybody's welcome. Hi, my name is Jessie. I'm a writer by trade, a novelist by aspiration. I do not have the answers, not yet. I'm not a certified coach with patented life theories or a high-flying CEO with productivity hacks. I am no guru, but what I am is endlessly curious about other people and their stories. I've programmed and run a literary and storytelling event series for over a decade now, so I know firsthand the power that stories have to inspire and transform, and that's what we're here for. So, if you want to find your voice or to be inspired, if you're in a liminal state, a similar boat, if you just really like books or want to feast on the sweeping stories of amazing people's life and work, then this podcast might be for you. Please follow, subscribe, and join me on this voyage into voice. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find ours along the way. Hello, welcome back to another episode of How You Find Your Voice. Today, I'm joined by the writer Naomi Ishiguro to talk about her new novel, The Rainshadow Orphans. It's the first in a dazzling new trilogy blending cyberpunk and fantasy, inspired by Japanese folklore and anime. It's a world of spirits and dragons, hackers and bots. The novel has already been described as Studio Ghibli meets Pokemon, and I loved it. We talk about building a world where myth and technology exist side by side, the influence of Japanese folklore and yokai, and how Naomi's former students inspired the world of the novel. We also talk about what it actually means to be a writer, and to keep believing in yourself creatively in an industry that can feel uncertain and exhausting even after publication. Naomi speaks very honestly about identity, legitimacy, teaching, and the strange feeling that publishing a book doesn't necessarily mean you suddenly feel like you've made it. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too.
Thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And hi, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be on it and for coming to talk about your new book, which I absolutely loved. The Rainshadow Orphans. It's an amazing world that you've created. It's a blend of sci-fi and fantasy. It's set on a mythological archipelago where there are sun spirits and dragons, but also kind of hackers and bots and advanced technology. It's a brilliant blend of things. It also seems very rooted in Southeast Asian or perhaps Japanese culture. I wondered if we could start with exploring some of your influences.
It's hard for me to sort of reverse engineer this and think about where it came from. I was a freelance teacher for quite a long time, doing after school clubs for creative writing and teaching adults and that kind of thing, but then panicked about job security in the pandemic and did a PGC and spent a year as a proper secondary school teacher. And it really came from that. So it was the influence of being around these sort of really vibrant and inspiring young people who are just hilarious, and they're very inquiring minds, and yeah, just very curious, very determined characters. And they were all obsessed with anime, like specifically shonen. They loved kind of the classics like Naruto. They loved like newer things. I think Demon Slayer was just starting to become a big thing.
What exactly is Demon Slayer for the sort of old ladies or something?
It's one of my favorite things. It's just an amazing anime. It's this Japanese studio called, I'm going to mispronounce it, it's like UFO Tables. And it's based on a manga, so it feels quite novelistic. And it is just about this boy called Tanjiro whose family kind of gets killed by demons. And then he becomes a demon slayer to make sure that it can't happen to anyone else ever again. But really, it's just so deep and great about like how you can suffer loss in your life and not let it turn you into a demon yourself.
Well, it sounds really good.
Because Tanjiro, his whole thing as a hero is that he's compassionate and kind, and he's even kind to the demons that he has to slay. You can see their humanity of the humans they used to be, and I love it so much. It's so good. There's so many great things going on in anime. They just explore such interesting kind of themes and character dynamics. So yeah, I highly recommend Demon Slayer. But anyway, yeah, the kids so into all of this stuff, and I sort of grown up watching, you know, like just whatever kind of filtered through, like My Neighbor Totoro, Sailor Moon, or whatever. And then, you know, you kind of drift and do different things as an adult. And then it was just coming back into that world and seeing how excited they were by all of this. And then I started watching it so that I could chat to them about it. And just because I was curious, because like when people start telling you about it, you're like, this sounds amazing. And that sort of all was just what went into the book, because it's about young people. And the characters aren't quite teens. They're like 17 to 21, I think. And Haru, the prince character, is younger. So I do think the influences mainly came from the young people I was working with specifically.
That's so interesting. I wasn't expecting that somehow, because this book has been likened to cross between Studio Ghibli and what was the other one? Pokemon, for example. So I thought maybe Route 10 was all of those influences, but you were really inspired by the children that you were teaching.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And the cultures, the things that they introduced me to, like all the bubble tea stuff. I mean, I tried to make it not explicitly Japanese because, you know, I'm half Japanese, but I'm not really an authority at all on Japanese culture. I was just interested in themes of diaspora and multiculturalism, and just all of these kind of Japanese pop culture and Asian pop culture things that have just filtered through to the West in general and what we make of them here. So yeah, bubble tea is not Japanese, but the kids were just obsessed with it, and it was just a kind of fun thing to incorporate into lesson plans and stuff like that.
Do you have a favourite bubble tea?
No, I kind of think like mango-y, green, just the fresh mango green. I'm not so into the milky things, just anything with a lot of sugar. It's kind of fruity and sugar. It's just fun. And it's nice sometimes to go out with friends and not to have to drink or go to a pub and just be like, we're going for bubble tea.
Bubble tea is fun. You know, I don't love it myself. My children absolutely love it. But the textures, the way that you can make it your own as well.
It's just really fun. You can customize it with different combinations. You're like, wow, there's a lot going on. So yeah, they have a ultimate bubble tea machine in the book. And that was really just, I was just thinking about the kids I was teaching. What would they want in their magical den flat if they were hanging out with their friends trying to save the world as a little gang? I was like, well, they'd obviously want an ultimate bubble tea machine, so let's give them that.
Yeah, it's such a good little detail. I love their little kind of found family there, the three of them, the kind of life that they led together. It might be a good point to ask you about that. Like, found family does seem to be quite a strong recurring theme in the book. We've got Haru and Kei, we've got the Kawakami siblings, we've got the matriarchs of Auntie Reiko and Meili. What do you think you were looking to explore?
So I have written another novel as well. It's literally called Common Ground. But I think this area of common ground is something I'm always really interested in. I really like looking at these themes and ideas of the bonds that we can form across cultural boundaries, and this idea that you can have bonds of solidarity with people who are just from completely different contexts to you, and that we can extend that sort of sense of family and that your well-being is my well-being. Yeah, to people who aren't from our immediate circle. And I think that's such an amazing kind of human impulse. It does happen. There's so many stories of it and examples in sort of everyday life, despite what a lot of current trends in politics. I do really believe that like more in common than divides us kind of thing. And I think it's also like you kind of have to, because I think that's the best of us and is what saves us as humans and societies. So found family is I always try and have it in my books because I think it's just such an interesting and important thing, people's ability to go out into the world and form these bonds with people who are different from them.
And yes, that and a recurring theme, perhaps maybe friendship
Yeah.
as well. I mean, I guess found family is friendship taken to a further level, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, I think that is it. Like, I'm always a huge advocate for friendship. I feel like friend should be like the greatest title of honor because we don't have a literature of friendship. So I think millennials are maybe changing that. I don't know because we write a lot about friendship, think a lot about it. But I think that's why I look at these family bonds because it gives it that sense of conveying the sort of the extent of it and the importance. Yeah.
That comes across really strongly in the book. And also, I guess, leading into that sense of community. How did you go about creating The Keeper's Children? Where did that idea come to you, this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have always been interested in books and stories that advocate for, and this is potentially a bit more of a Japanese influence, I don't know, it might just be just a thing, that are more concerned with community and society than the individual.
I see what you
Yeah,
mean.
there's so many American stories, not to generalize, where there's like the hero and he self-actualizes and goes and saves the world. He was the chosen one. And I'm a bit like, okay, that's fine, that's great, love those. But I also think that I don't know, the way I like to think about things is again those bonds, those like what we owe to each other as a society, and that feeling that like we are part of a society. And yes, contract is broken down in many places and people are feeling very disenfranchised, but even in America, like all these terrible things going on, there's communities coming together to really help people and look out for the neighbors. And I'm very interested in exploring these community values and common ground, literal and metaphorical.
Yeah, that makes sense about the kind of like difference between that sort of egotism of the West, like you said, self-actualizing Western sort of philosophy. And I think that is true. It's kind of more kind of a collective we, perhaps.
Yeah, not to like idealize, there can be the individual can be subsumed within values that aren't necessarily the best or helpful. But I do think that it is important to shift from just complete individualism, and that's what is kind of fashionable, I think, a lot of the time, and seen as a dominant, like the water we swim in. I mean, I'm probably generalizing massively, but yeah, I just quite like to question that. There are so many stories where people prioritize, society, community, other people, and like the bonds and the obligations that we have towards each other, and those aren't necessarily always the stories that get told.
Do you think that kind of questioning of the kind of status quo or how things are the water that we swim in, do you think that's why you're kind of drawn to speculative fiction?
Maybe. Because I think you can do that in literary fiction as well. I'm very like, what are the genre divides? I don't know. I used to work in a little independent bookshop. That was like my first proper job. And we just shelved everything under fiction. There was a separate sci-fi thing, a separate crime thing. And I think that's more like how it is when you're writing it. You're just like, I'm writing this book. Not really sure like where it will be shelved, but then the genre kind of gets slightly applied. I mean, obviously I knew I was writing fantasy. Again, that came from the kids. Some of them had been trying to read my other novel, Common Ground. And, if you're like 12, you're trying to read this thing. It's about 2003 land ownership in Britain. I was like, oh, this isn't
immediate common ground.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, I haven't reached out to you enough. I need to give you more dragons and adventure and more plot and just fun, I think, was something I really wanted to do. So I think it was partly that. I just thought it was a good medium to like communicate.
I love it. I mean, as I said to you before we pressed record, I've been writing a YA sci-fi fantasy book. Quite a few years now. I keep like coming back to it and then sort of giving up and like wanting to burn it. And it's really hard to do the world building. That's what I so appreciated about this book. World building is excellent because it's really hard. I wanted to kind of ask you, where did the idea start and then how did you manage to explode it out and make it seem so realistic?
So world building is almost its own skill, I think. Like, are you working with anyone else to do it or are you just doing it yourself?
I started off doing it myself and then I did a course with this place called Golden Egg that kind of, it's like teaching you to write for children at grade or YA. So I did that a few years ago. I had my second child. And I've come back to it again. So there is a community. So it's quite helpful. Everyone's like grappling with the same, like, it's basically. But
yeah, having a writing community, I think, is probably the most important thing for me as well. I think that really helped the world building because it was very character-led. The first thing I had in my head was actually Toshiko and May, these two sisters, had lost their kind of adopted auntie. and just fending for themselves and trying to make their way in the world. And I like the idea of one who was like the cool introvert at home doing all her tech stuff, and the other who was much more of a kind of like going out, like fighting and chasing and doing all the kind of like physical adventuring, and that she was kind of still finding her feet and quite young. And so I had the sisters in my head first, and then the story, I just wrote the story, and it was very kind of like discovery. I'm not a huge player. I like to discover as I go along, otherwise I get quite bored. But then I had to sort out the world building. And it was really 3 friends who really helped me. One who was like just a writing genius, who's a fantastic novelist, a really good friend, just read a draft and was just like, okay, just asked me lots of questions that were really helpful, being like, so how does the economy work?
Yeah, all of these little details are essential.
Exactly. Yeah. And he was like, no, it does have a bearing on like, so you say they're like oppressed in the crescent. So how exactly does that manifest? What are they doing? Like, how are they? So he kind of got more into asking questions about that side of things. And that was when I got the idea of Keeper's Children, who are like the oppressed characters in the novel, who are sort of like our community that we follow. I got the idea of the society, the sort of the legitimate citizen society would be based on the unpaid labor of the Keeper's Children, the undocumented people, because that kind of drew out that theme of how societies often run on the labor of the very people that they vilify and exclude. So that kind of drew out with that. And then there's a magic system based on solar, which is sort of like numinous chi-like life force that flows through everything. That came from reading a lot about Japanese yokai stories and folklore, but also I have a friend who's a professional theoretical physicist, which is always handy to have on speed dial. So I could be like, so this solar force thing, does this make sense? And it's just really handy to be able to be like, does this make sense? Is this logical? And to have an actual scientist be like, well, no, but this might also make sense. So,
oh, that's brilliant. So you could get the actual kind of underpinnings, how the system works.
I wouldn't say that this is physically accurate, but someone who has a logical mind in that way and can see kind of systems, and if this, then this. If we have this kind of magic, then it's inconsistent with this. Because I think having rules to a magic system is super important. See, because what I love about the genre is it's actually quite democratic in that you can make something and then give it to the readers and be like, now this is your world to play and make up your own stories, use your imagination. But if the rules are a bit in flux, then they can't really do that. So it's like you really need to make the game fit. You need to make all the rules watertight.
Yeah.
And then the third friend was kind of Japanese cultural advice. She's also half Japanese, but has an MST in Japanese studies from the University of Oxford, which I most certainly don't. And this friend kind of just did a bit of and just went through and just helped me with some of the more cultural aspects of the world building. So I really needed a triumvirate of help. And I also made myself a map, which was handy. Alan wrote it with the map next to me to work out. So, I mean, it is its own thing. In a way, I love world building. And I feel like I could, if I could just world build all day, I probably would.
It's really
it's really fun.
What kind of questions were you asking? What kind of Japanese myths in particular?
It's more like the folkloric side of things. So there is a whole kind of area of folklore around the creatures called yokai, who are quite mysterious, and what they are and the general understanding of them has changed a lot over history. But they went from being, I think, just otherworldly demon kind of characters and a sort of way of explaining anything that was inexplicable, I guess, like sprites, elves, demons. But then, I mean, I'm definitely not the authority, but I think around Edo period Japan, potentially, they became more associated with kind of animistic ideas like objects owning personalities and acquiring a spirit if they're like kept for over 100 years. And there's also this idea of kami, so like the Shinto gods, it's sort of very kind of animist. There could be like a tree that just has the spirit as a kami and has its own shrine, or like a rock, or, you know, elements of the world. And yokai, they have a sort of strange relationship with kami to the extent that sometimes it's like some people, some scholars, I think, see kami as kind of these, you know, the definition of a kami is that humans have decided to worship it, and yokai is like a similar supernatural kind of manifestation within the world, but just unworshipped. Yeah. So I know that's kind of where my sun spirits kind of came from. It's a huge kind of complicated field, yokai studies, and the kind of definition is very in flux. And even that word yokai is quite new, I think. I mean, Mononoke, like the Ghibli film, Princess Mononoke, is like an older word for yokai. Yeah, but just I was interested in all of these stories, really. And I do think there's kind of modern pop cultural things like Pokemon and stuff like that. The idea that you could go out into the natural world and see these kind of quite magical creatures that are just kind of out there being mysterious. infinite
Yeah.
numbers and you can categorize them and spot them. And I think that very much comes from a yokai kind of culture as well. So those kind of
Yeah.
fed into the books with my spirits and gods.
I really like the sun spirits. Did you feel that you had to be culturally sensitive or aware when you were exploring, creating these spirits, or did you feel that it's fine to just, you had creative license?
Thing about kami in Shinto and in Japan is that there's sort of infinite numbers. I think people sort of often say it's like the 8 million gods. I'm saying that wrong, but it just means there's infinite. It's not a specific number. We don't know, because you could travel to a new place, you could go to a new mountain and find a new grove and there'd be another one there. And it's not that they're sort of up in the sky in some kind of pantheon. They are physically kind of part of the world and physically present. So I feel like you do have license in fiction, which is explicitly fiction. You can sort of make up your own creatures to some extent, and Miyazaki does it in Spirited Away. Like, they're not gods that anyone was going to recognize. It's the bathhouse of the gods, and he's invented, the river spirit comes and is, a swamp monster and then gets clean and becomes the river spirit, and that's all just of his own kind of. And Totoro's, what are Totoro's? Like, he's just made them up. It's sort of tree spirits. Well, I think there is a kind of license within a tradition that says there are infinite gods, infinite sort of animist creatures that could be encountered and worshipped or talked to, I guess, and that we can form a relationship with. That sort of allows a huge imaginative license to kind of invent your own creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, it's based on animism as opposed to an organized religion. So the reason I asked the question is, one, because obviously I'm grappling with these sorts of things as well. I love the fact that I'm bringing my book into this. It seems ridiculous, but it's on the axis of its spirit and technology as well. I was thinking about, have you read Children of Blood and Bone?
I actually haven't. It's on my shelf, but I haven't actually read it yet.
Yeah, because that Tomi Adeyemi, I think she did such a good job of kind of using the kind of Yoruba pantheon, and I know that she was like exploring kind of questions around that and consulted people about it as well.
Are you using specific pantheon, like actual kind of gods that exist within a tradition, or is it more?
It's a mix, really. So that's why I was thinking it's just like a hodgepodge of kind of different things. I'm quite interested in shamanism myself, and my sister's been on the path for 40 years as well, and I've got some experience of it. But I don't want to be like cultural appropriating anything, do you know what I mean? But it's really nature spirits, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's like how you do it. But then you think of kind of Catherine Rundell and Impossible Creatures. She's drawing all the kind of mythological canon as well, I suppose. So yeah, maybe you won't have to be constrained, do you?
Yeah, I think just as long as it's consistent within itself. And I think in fantasy you do have a certain amount of license to, I think as long as you are respectful of real world traditions, you have to be culturally sensitive when you're talking about things that are real. So if you are borrowing from Yoruba culture or whatever, make sure you know what you're doing and you've dealt with it with respect. But if you're inventing your own thing, then I think that does give you, because it's all in service to the story, right? For me, it was the main thing was the characters and the themes that I was wanting to explore and the story I wanted to tell. So the world building, it all had to serve that, really. I kind of love doing it in a vacuum. That's sort of more fun. But what you're really here to do is to tell a story, write a novel. I think that's the kind of main thing I was worried about, is that it all kind of was moving in the same direction of exploring those things I wanted to explore, I guess.
Yes. So you said that you're more of a kind of, they say pantser, don't they, rather than plotter. Yeah. Did you start with a question or a theme that you wanted to explore? Was there something that you wanted to answer, or did you just take the kind of inspiration that you got from your students and just ran with it?
I actually started with, I was interested in teaching, because I think so often in our lives we get taught, especially in the British education system, to answer questions very well. So like in situations like this, or as you're in a job interview or like an interview to get into sixth form or to uni or whatever, or you're answering history questions, the essays, like how far does blah, blah, blah. And you get used to answering questions, but we're not taught how to ask questions. It's quite hard to ask the right questions. And what I love teaching is that it's all about kind of asking questions well. And I got to the point where I was structuring my lesson plans based on questions. So instead of headers where I wasn't like intro, like we do this, whatever, it would be like a progression of questions that I would want to have the lesson kind of ask to the room, to the students. And that was how I tried to structure the logic of the lesson. And I tried to take that approach to writing the book as well, because I think Common Ground, my previous novel, was very much more written like a kind of thesis. Like I was like, we need more common ground, and then wrote the line of argument for why we need common ground. And it's a bit like, people know, they don't get it. And I'm still proud of that book, but it's a bit like, no one needs like a 25-year-old to just rant at you about why we need more common ground. So I think what's more interesting, perchance, is to structure things around questions. So just interesting questions that you want to get readers thinking about and asking themselves, and to not attempt to like provide an answer well. That's not why we go to fiction. It's to provoke questions. So I did have a whole series of questions. I can't fully remember. I've actually got on my notice board. But I had it up. I actually remember what they were, because this was 3 years ago now. Yeah. Right now I've got, is it wrong to follow your heart when it means betraying your family? Can we ever judge a politician to be fully evil, even when their policies have a terrible effect on the world and society? Can an oppressed minority ever forgive a majority population which didn't stand up to its oppression and tacitly allowed it to happen? So like all these kind of questions, I don't know, those may not have ended up being like the big questions, but yeah, I literally had them on a board.
They're definitely in there, aren't they? And it sounds like you learnt a lot from the process of writing your first book.
Yeah.
Which I haven't read, but I really want to, especially after reading this. I'd be interested to see the difference in your voice.
So I actually have 2 other books, but the other one's short stories, and then there's
the short stories one.
Yeah, but the Common Ground is a novel as well. But yeah, I think they read quite differently. I think Common Ground is probably more like how I speak. I think the themes are quite similar, but on the surface, the voice is probably quite different.
A few themes really struck me. One of them was revenge, which I thought was very interesting. There's a great quote in there. I don't think you truly want that like for like kind of revenge at all. I think what you want is to win. And these are not the same things, you understand. So what did you want to explore about revenge and what it means?
That is an interesting question. I think I was interested in just in narratively, because there's a great tradition of just revenge dramas, like so much Renaissance plays, everything. And that, it just really drives a plot. It just immediately gives characters something that they really want and need to do and need to live up to. So it is a sort of just narrative hinge. And I'm obsessed with a book called The Lies of Lachlan Mora by a fantasy writer called Scott Lynch, which I highly recommend if you're writing fantasy. Is so good.
Yeah.
And that does become a revenge drama. And I just love the genre, it's great. So I kind of wanted to do my own take on that with young people. But yeah, I think I was just interested in that idea of teenagers. Often there's, I don't really want to get into it all, but there's a lot of kind of issues with gang stuff, and also just with just teenagers just having friendship issues, to be honest, where they just can't zoom out yet because they're not old enough really to have that sort of 3D sense of a situation. And they just think, this is unfair, and I hate this person, I want them to suffer in the way that they made me suffer. And it's a bit like, yes, but does that help anybody? What are you feel this way, yes, but zoom out, take a beat, and are you going to gain anything from that, or are you just going to shoot yourself in the foot by acting on that impulse? So I was interested in that, because it's something that we all have to learn. Like as teenagers and as kids, we kind of have that. I mean, children have such a strong sense of justice and injustice and what's unfair. I think that idea of revenge not being just like for like. And again, I don't know, when I worked in customer service, very rarely a customer was mean, but occasionally you do. And if you talk back to them and say, you can't speak to me like that, all you're going to do is put your job in danger. Like, you're not going to help anyone. Yeah. How you win in that situation is by winning them over, or just even just getting through the day. So I was interested in the idea of helping my characters think strategically rather than just sitting on immediate grievance. So yeah.
There are so many allegorical details, I think, in the book. That's kind of one of them, though. Yeah, on the one hand, it's what you just said, the way that teenagers, their prefrontal cortex, whatever, isn't ready and they're just impulsive. But then, if you look at what's happening on the world stage at the moment, there's quite a lot of like for like and revenge. Were you consciously trying to engage with the political, or were you influenced by things that are happening at the moment or in the past?
I don't want to over-egg. I mean, it is a fun novel for young people about dragon pearls and bubbles. It's fun. So I'm not a political commentator. But I think I was just interested in that idea within diplomacy as well, that you have to give someone like a convincing climb down position, and that often just that idea of kind of compromise. And that sort of just taking people down for the sake of it actually means that no one wins. But thinking about it, do my characters do that? I'm not sure.
I think definitely they do. I think there's a real arc of learning, definitely for one of them.
Yeah.
They're driven by justice, aren't they? I guess there's a theme of, there's humans being displaced in terms of like location and place, but also in terms of biotechnology. It just feels really current. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about AI, and what were you looking to explore emerging technologies as well. What did you want to say there?
Yeah, I mean, that just it's there in the book because it's part of the world, but I don't feel like I have a big commentary about it. I'm very much a Luddite myself. I'm very suspicious of AI. I'm very wary of it.
What makes you feel suspicious?
I mean, like, it's dangerous because we don't generally understand it. And yeah, obviously technological redundancy and that kind of thing. But I think personally, it's more the idea that it allows us to not think for ourselves. Because I think that's what we're seeing so far. Like, I have friends that work in AI and they'd probably be like, no, the problems are much bigger. But for me, just how I encounter it, like seeing kids write essays with ChatGPT, or when you ask friends who love using it a question, they'll ask Google AI or ChatGPT rather than thinking about it for themselves. And I do feel like when you lose this sort of thinking muscle and you feel intellectually reliant on this thing that isn't. So I do think if it makes us less critical and less able to analyze things from our own perspectives. And I always try and resist being very skeptical about technology because it has largely brought lots of amazing things to our lives as well, especially in medical science. So it's more just I liked it in the world as, again, because the kids coding was a huge thing in the school I worked in, and lots of the kids were into robotics, and they went to a robotics championship in America. And they had hoodies, you know, like how sports teams, like when I was a kid, used to have hoodies and they were like super cool and they had their names on them. And I was like, this is amazing. They're so cool, but they're like doing tech stuff. And that's what I wanted for the characters, to be able to have a character like May, who is a computer hacker and programmer. And she loves being at home and she is an introvert, but she's cool.
Yes, she's a great character. I really like her. I like the way she's just, I don't know, really straight talking. Many soft skills.
Yeah. But yeah, so you said your world has technology in as well in your book. Yeah. Is that kind of in service of the plot, or are you exploring AI? And
no, it's definitely integral to the plot. It's definitely kind of technology, nature, axis. And actually I started off with a certain premise and a kind of prejudice against technology. I think I'm like naturally quite a Luddite, like you just said you were. And I don't know, I think I started using AI because I wanted to understand it. And through doing so, I've come to appreciate it and realize that these things are very nuanced. I was quite frightened of the whole idea of AI and kind of, you know, obviously there are projections of the disastrous things that might happen. But I guess any tool, it's how you use it, right? Yeah. And it's not necessarily, nothing's inherently bad or evil. And there are like ways that we can mitigate it. I mean, maybe it's too late now, I don't know, but
yeah, 100%. I really subscribe to that. Nothing is inherently good or evil. It's what you do with it. Yeah.
Yeah. A bit like the dragon pearls in your...
Yes.
Yeah. I love this. Was that something that you created yourself? Is that something that you came across in folklore?
I wanted to have the dragons in my book be kind of Eastern dragons, because you see so many of the kind of small, kind of Western, the worm kind of traditions that comes from, I don't know, Norse and Anglo-Saxon literature and all of that. And I just wanted to see a fantasy novel with, I mean, there are plenty now, but yeah, I wanted mine to be Eastern dragons. And the dragon pearl is part of that mythology, but I was very fast and loose with it. So the idea that it gives you a connection to the magic of the dragons and enhances your special skills and connects you to this kind of solar chi energy, that is all just invented. I think, I mean, there is an element of the pearl holding some of the dragon's power and it being like a precious thing that you can steal and access some. I think that is within myth more generally, but the specific way I was using it, I was just a bit like, look, it's appeared in China and Japan in so many different forms. I can just make up my own dragon pearl myth. So
engaging with the tradition, definitely. It feels like a very hopeful book. It feels like there's a kind of like a David and Goliath situation going on, but yeah, I feel like there's a real thread of hope that runs through it. What were you wanting to say about hope, and what makes you hopeful?
I feel that hope is the only logical position to hold. So I feel like growing up, because I'm 34, so the whole Obama thing was like a massive formative moment in my life, the hope and change. And obviously consuming every single piece of media that Michelle has ever put out into the world as well. So I feel like she's sort of raised a generation of us. I feel like the point of all of that is it's just like you can't just give people something and be like, it's rubbish. Oh no. And so much of literature art, you can do that. That's legitimate. But I just somehow feel like Michelle Obama is in my head being like, why are you doing this? It's not, there's no utility to it. It's not practical. And I think I do want to use writing to sort of engage in some kind of positive way and make the world better, I hope. And I think telling stories that instead of just being like, look, it's a disaster, oh no, like that kind of that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you have to offer up a model, an example of how change might happen. And it's not a policy document, it's more of an emotional pathway. But yeah, I think it's the only logical and practical and kind of sensible thing to do, really, with the world the way it is. We don't really have much space to just be pessimistic and give up.
No, absolutely. It's like what you just said. Yeah, what you just said made me think of the 5-act structure, the kind of ending on sort of resolution or positivity rather than like this kind of nihilism of stopping in the 4th act. Everything is awful. So it's, something to hang on to.
I love, especially short stories that just kind of finish and leave you thinking about things, just being like, oh God, what on earth went on there? And just kind of play in your mind. But for some reason, the work that I produce, I always feel like I need to offer some kind of hope change thing.
Especially if, you're writing with young people in mind as well, like you say, how important that is. So you grew up in a very kind of writerly household. Your father's obviously Kazuo Ishiguro. He's a very famous, lauded writer. I wanted to ask you, like, when did you realize that you wanted to be a writer? Was that something that you absorbed at home?
I think I just read a lot, watched a lot of films and things. People will say, what was the impact of your dad? I mean, I really know, but
probably bored of answering questions.
No, I think it normalizes it because you can see someone doing it and they go upstairs and they do their writing. So we're like, oh, I'll do my writing too because it's something to do and we can make up stories. But yeah, I think it's just if you read an awful lot, you think I would want to make my own work. I think fantasy is a very good genre for that because there's a whole world of fan fiction, self-published people just making up their own stories in fantasy world. It very much encourages you to like be a participant as well as a consumer. I hate the word consumer, especially with books. It's not content. It's like it's art. But yeah, like a spectator maybe. Yeah, I think kids just naturally want to make their own stuff when they're I mean, did you always know you wanted to write things or are you
Well, I couldn't really call myself a writer yet. I mean, I used to walk around with a notebook when I was 6, but a bit pretentious. But it's just something I always wanted to write stories, and I'd write poems and things. And then I stopped doing that. I guess maybe through my teens, early 20s, and it felt like something that was very far away, and you get swept up in life. Oh, I'm going to go down this avenue. Did you continue writing all the way through your life? Is that something that you've always turned to?
Yeah, I think it's something that I've always seen myself at. I think I'm always pivoting and changing careers and jobs and just life, and as we all do, I think millennials especially. But I think the core thread is something to do with being a writer. And that doesn't mean I'm like writing all the time. But when I was teaching, I barely wrote. I don't think I wrote anything. I was just focusing everything on lesson planning and just kind of being as good a teacher as I could. And that's like it was very time intensive, obviously, with all the marking.
Lesson plans, like you said, but I guess that's a form of storytelling in a way. You have to structure it in a certain way.
I think it really is, and I felt like I was studying all the books with the students. Really, like I taught Jane Eyre to my GCSE class, and I'd read Jane Eyre before, but I hadn't studied it. So in that way that you study a book at school, it's such a privilege to get to do it again as a teacher because you don't ever get to know books as well as you do your GCSE text because you go through it very slowly and talk in such depth about almost every page. And with Jane Eyre, it's such a good novel that I feel like I was, and the students are amazing. So I felt like I learned so much about how to construct a novel just by breaking it down with them and just looking at narrative point of view and first person and restraint and structure and progression. It was like a masterclass really in how to write a novel. So I think, even if I'm not writing, there's always just been a thread of being curious about writing. It's the one thing that I've consistently held on to and that has been like a constant, I'd say.
Interesting. I saw in your kind of acknowledgements that you mentioned, I can't exactly remember how you said it, but you indicate that you had fallen out of love with writing or that you'd given up on a writing career, which is really surprising to me as someone who's already published 2 novels. What was going on there and how did you manage to get over that slump?
Well, to be honest, a lot of friends have been in similar positions, especially those of us who published in the pandemic. I think just having published a book, it really doesn't mean you've made it, unfortunately. Like you always have to have either another career or, as I was doing, a weird portfolio career of other bits. And it just always feels like, are you a writer? I don't know, does anyone read the book? And that sense of, will I ever get another book published if you're not under contract? Yeah, I think it's very hard to see yourself as a writer when it really a job, and you don't know, it's so hard to write a book and you don't know if you're ever going to be able to do it again. And I think I got very disillusioned with, I don't know, I think I just got very exhausted. I poured literally everything I had into those 2 books and then just felt a bit like I don't have anything else to say, and this isn't really a job, so I need to go and get a job. Hence the teaching. But I always wanted to write. I wanted to carry on. It was just the sense of the industry and making it a career. And I just thought I'd need to step away from this. And yeah, so I think that's what was sort of going on there.
I think a lot of people could relate to that. Well, published authors would be able to relate, I'm sure, but also just for us like non-published writers, just that kind of feeling of trying to gear yourself up to do it again, to keep going in the face of kind of,
I mean,
positive reception.
Yeah.
Or,
But that's the thing about it when people say, oh, I'm writing, but I'm not published, so am I a writer? I'm like, no, you are, because it actually doesn't feel different for most of the published writers. Like, it's the same experience. You publish a book, does anyone read it? We don't know. Then you have to just do it again. Like, okay. And it's not really your job. So I just think it's about whether you have like that artistic drive and integrity and interest in the craft and the passion for it, really. And that's what makes you a writer, not like whether your book's on the shelf. Because my books were on the shelf for years, but then like bookshops didn't really stock them. No one picked them up. That doesn't make it any different. Like, my identity as a writer came from wanting to write, not from whether or not you could go to some like corner of stone and really find your work in some obscure location. Like, it didn't really make a difference. Yeah,
I love that. That is so encouraging. I was going to ask you, who's your favorite female writer of all time? I mean, you mentioned kind of Jane Eyre there.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, there's so many amazing writers. It's really hard to choose. Maybe Charlotte Bronte. I mean, Jane Eyre is an amazing novel. I absolutely love it, and I just feel bonded to it, having had that straight experience. And teaching it to teenagers is about Jane as a governess, and she's finding her way as a woman, and like they were and I was, and it was all very like, what do we want in life? What is what is life as a woman? So that was great, like, because it was such a communal experience, and it is just so fantastic in terms of like Jane's interiority. Yeah, I always have a real soft spot as well for a novel called I Capture the Castle. Dodie Smith, which is, I just think it's so much better than a lot of people give it credit for. Like, it's so clever and so heartfelt and so beautiful about literally finding your voice as a writer. This girl, a 17-year-old, writing in her diary, and she's been trying to write before, and it all just comes out as really stilted and like parodies of other people. And she just starts to try and like free write and write naturally about her life and things around her to try and find her voice. And it's very much sort of coming of age story. She falls in love for the first time, doesn't really work out. And she just learns stuff about life, but it's almost modernist because the diary format is happening in a continuous present, and the sort of telling is always updating constantly in line with the time of the told, which is a really interesting format because the voice can change and develop a sort of a more assured perspective, and we actually literally see her coming into this. The writing, which is, I think that's just, it's so, seems so like effortless, but actually it's a really hard thing to do.
That's a really good one. I need to go check that out. What advice have you got for someone who's looking to find their voice?
Ooh, like as a writer or just as like a person in the world?
Both or either.
Okay, maybe that thing as a writer, like, don't wait to be legitimized by external sources, potentially, because it will never happen. No, it might do. We can always hope, but really, it has to come from you, and just start seeing yourself as a writer if that's how you feel like you are, because you are, and what you're doing is, even like the biggest, fanciest writers who have the most readers, Stephen King, whatever, like, it's the same work. You're doing the same thing. You're doing the same activity. If you're writing and you're taking it seriously, then you are a writer, whether or not you have external validation. So I think just having that confidence to be like, no, I am a writer because I'm doing it. I'm doing the activity. I think that is probably helpful. As a human, probably just listen to Michelle Obama's podcast, because she will say all the things that are better than anything that I could say.
That's a good tip. Naomi, thank you so much for speaking to me. It's been an absolute joy. And I love the book. And good luck with the next two. Have you written them, actually?
I'm in the process of writing book 2 currently. It's meant to be further along than it is, but it will be fine, as it always will be.
When does it come out? Is it supposed to come out like next year?
In 2027, but we'll see how I get on. I'm trying my level best. Just you do one thing and everything starts unraveling, and you're like, okay, now I have to rewrite this section. Then you fix it, and then something else unravels, and you're like, oh no.
The writing process.
But like, if you want to enjoy it as well, we'll see how that goes.
Good luck with it, and good luck with the book being published. I'm sure it's going to be a hit.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, good luck to you with your writing and to everyone else out there with their projects and writing and everything too.
I found chatting to Naomi really uplifting. I loved hearing how inspired she was by the young people she taught, and how curiosity about their interests helped spark the whole extraordinary world of her novel. I was also fascinated by what she said about teaching Jane Eyre in such close detail, and how that ended up becoming a kind of masterclass in pacing, structure and character. It's a good reminder that creative influences are often just bubbling away quietly in the background. Even if you're not writing per se, everything's feeding in. I actually felt a bit foolish, or vulnerable maybe, talking about my own attempt at writing a book. Because writing over a long period of time can leave you feeling frustrated, stuck, or like a failure, especially if it's all self-directed. But I found Naomi's response genuinely encouraging, that you're a writer if you write. It's a verb, not a status symbol. And it isn't dependent on publication, acclaim, or external validation, nice as those things surely are. I also thought it was interesting that even with her success, writing still feels slightly precarious in some ways. I think that's probably true for a lot of creative work, but the artistic drive that she talked about keeps you going. What really struck me was Naomi's connection to the joy of writing, following rabbit holes of curiosity, discovering things without always having a plan, and asking herself what would genuinely delight and excite the reader. And maybe that's part of finding your voice too, staying connected to the things that genuinely fascinate you, keeping that spark of joy alive to get through the heavier times. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone you think might like it too. It really does help more people discover the podcast and makes a big difference to independent shows like this one. You can also sign up to the How You Find Your Voice mailing list via the show notes for updates on future episodes, live events like supper clubs and salons, and everything else that's happening around the project. Thank you so much for your ears. Till next time.